So with no further ado, I'm going to get us to introduce ourselves. So Gifford, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Sally. I'm Dr. Gifford Rhamie, Rhamie as in do, re, mi. And since we're focusing on words today, as part of a storyline or narrative or conversation or communication, I figured I will focus on the pronunciation of my name, which is Rhamie as in do, re, mi, fa, sol. And often I use that just to get people to not only see my name, but hear my name, because I'm a bit precious about the pronunciation of my name, although I will forgive you if you mispronounce my name. I work with Anne in leading race excellence, and this is an organization that helps to guide and partner with other organizations in getting their diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging sorted out, embedded right throughout their organizations. So it's not just sitting nicely as a mission statement, but it's there as part of their praxis. And I leverage my own doctorate, which is in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, in order to enable this. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic.
Anne?
Thank you so much. I don't know if we can sing along, but Anne, over to you. If you fancy singing your introduction, you're welcome to.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Sally. Yes, my name is Anne Palmer. Much easier to say than Gifford Rhamie. And I will add that he still tells me off every now and then when I forget how to pronounce his name correctly. But Gifford and I work together. We are co-executive directors of Race Excellence. My background is fundamentally in many years in leadership, or being part of boards, as well as linking with education and universities. My strands, I wear numerous hats, but they usually fit around diversity and inclusion, leadership, and artificial intelligence, but I shall hide that one for today and keep my focus. But delighted to be here with you all, and this is going to be phenomenal.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anne. And I will conclude then and say I'm Sally Pritchett. Yes, funny enough, that's actually not my surname. My actual married surname is Caduce, but it's quite difficult to pronounce and even more difficult to spell. So my husband suggested that I never change my name for working practices. So I basically have two identities. I'm a communications expert and also co-founder and CEO of Something Big, who are a creative communications agency. And we help businesses to use and elevate communication to make their workplaces fairer, healthier and happier for all, which is something that we all want, I believe. We have got a gem of a webinar for you today, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by Anne and Gifford and that we've brought this all together. And I'm going to hand over straight away to Gifford, and I think we're probably going to start by sharing a little video. So Gifford, do you want me to just go straight into that?
Please. Yes.
Right, Charlie, let's do it.
If you want to understand the first few weeks of the second Trump administration, go back and listen to what Steve Bannon told PBS's Frontline in 2019.
The opposition party is the media, and the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with three things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover, but we gotta start with muzzle velocity. So it's gotta start, it's gotta hammer, it's gotta, muzzle velocity.
Muzzle velocity. Bannon's insight there is real. Focus is a fundamental substance of democracy. It is particularly the substance of opposition. People largely learn of what the government is doing through the media. So if you overwhelm the media...
A record-setting number of executive orders.
Everybody pardoned. Violence, non-violence.
Including assaulting police officers.
Birthright citizenship.
We live in unprecedented times right now.
If you keep it moving from one thing to the next...
So far, so good.
Is this
legal?
If you give it too many places it needs to look.
You've never been deported before?
All at once.
All federal grants and loans will be halted.
Look, there is a purge happening.
Frankly, unprecedented in its nature.
Guantanamo.
DEI.
The Gulf of America.
No coherent opposition can really emerge. It is hard to even think coherently. Donald Trump's first 2 weeks in the White House have followed Bannon's strategy like a script. The flood is a point. The overwhelm is a point. The message wasn't in any one executive order or announcement. It was in the cumulative effect of all of them. The sense that this is Trump's country now. It is his government now. It follows his will. It does what he wants. That he is limitless. If he says that birthright citizenship is over, then it's over. Or so he wants you to think.
Thank you. So you heard it. Muzzle velocity. Did you catch that word? We can get to the next slide, Charlie. Where we are bombarded with loads of words, and that bombardment serves as a strategy for distraction. They want us to be distracted. Well, here in the next few minutes, we're going to reclaim these words, reclaim this space. We're going to talk about words unbound, and we're going to talk about reclaiming race conversations as part of this catalyst for inclusion and racial equity. So here's the truth bomb I want to start with. That often the modern workplace is bad at talking about race. And when I say bad, I mean, let's have a diversity workshop and call it a day bad. Conversations get sanitized, words policed, and before you know it, nobody is saying anything of substance at all. And here we have a catalogue of words that have already been banned in government spaces in America. And you've heard the saying that when America sneezes, Britain catches a cold. So we've got to watch this space. So here's the thing. Words shape our world. When language is restricted, our identities fracture. And that's what we're talking about today, reclaiming the words, the narratives, the conversations that make us whole. Not just for our own sanity, I hasten to add, but because workplaces that don't do this are doomed to remain stagnant and excluding. Do you want progress? Well, you need dialogue. So let's get into it, Charlie. I want us to see and imagine an office where everyone is afraid of saying the wrong thing. Let's imagine that for a bit. Where meetings feel like walking on eggshells and discussions about race never go beyond corporate buzzwords. Sounds familiar? I opened a recent workshop, for example, last week with an ERG of people of color. You know, this is a network, people network group in a particular organization. And I asked them, what are the challenges that we face about talking about race? And here is how the conversation played out. There was a consensus around the notion that words are being policed. You mention race in a meeting and suddenly everyone goes silent. People avoid conversations out of fear of saying the wrong thing. You may just want to share a racial incident, for instance, that happened to you on the way to work, and people look at you vacantly because they feel that words are being policed. A second feature was fractured stories. That's how I couched it. A colleague from a marginalized background has to compartmentalize their experiences because it's not professional, you see, to talk about them. They can't bring themselves to work, at least the human part of what they want to share in their workplace. And the third feature was that of the consequence of a partial presence. You bring only the corporate friendly version of yourself to work, and you leave key parts of your identity at the door because people don't really get you, and so they don't know you. And the last consequence is stunted growth. It's not just individuals who suffer when we police words and when we have fractured stories and when we have our partial presence, but organizations do too. So suppressing real conversations means fewer ideas are shared, less innovation, and lower retention rates. So if you don't address this, we create a workplace where words become dangerous instead of enlightening. But here's the good news. We can break the cycle. And it starts with how we treat language, Charlie. So let's talk about flipping the script in terms of living narratives. What happens when we actually reclaim words and stories in the workplace? Well, let's think of this reclamation as words as liberation. Imagine a workplace where employees can speak openly about race without fear, where a Black woman's experience, for example, isn't dismissed as playing the race card, but instead is valued as expertise. You heard it, expertise. It helps, for instance, with identifying potential markets, with democratizing your sales pitch, with appropriating the right tone, seeing it as expertise. Also, another aspect of a living narrative or one's lived experience is seeing stories as identity. What if your professional identity, for instance, included your cultural background instead of despite it? Here I'm talking about a company with real inclusion that allows employees to bring their full selves to work. And then the third point is about using your voice as presence. You see, if you can't talk about your experiences at work, are you really present? Workplaces need to make space for genuine conversations, not just PR-friendly sound bites. Words aren't property, you see. They can't be locked away, as some are trying to do across the pond. They belong to communities, not corporations. And when we let them breathe, we create something truly radical. We create real presence. And so finally, Charlie, I just want to end this segment with the notion of thinking of a framework for authentic dialogue. And this framework I want to suggest to you is made up of 4 pillars. And in thinking about these 4 pillars, we want to actually think about how we actually make this work. How do we reclaim conversations about race without turning them into performative exercise? So here's the framework I'm suggesting at this phase of our presentation. First pillar, resist language policing. I alluded to this before. Instead of avoiding words, let's explore them. If we can't talk about race openly, we can't address racial inequities effectively. For instance, Black people used to be referred to as Negroes. There was another N word, of course, but we won't get into that. Then we were called colored. Then somebody thought of Black people. Then somebody else thought about African American or African Caribbean or African descended people. Then somebody else thought about people of color, and other people thought about Black people of color. And there are other iterations of this, as you know. Well, language changes all the time, and that's okay. The point is, let's be open and transparent about this, and let's talk about it and discuss it. The second pillar is honor complete narratives. Don't just acknowledge diversity, validate people's experiences. And that means giving space for real stories, not just the ones that fit into a corporate memo. The third pillar is embrace discomfort. Now, if a conversation about race in your workplace feels too easy, you're probably doing it wrong. And that's because discomfort doesn't mean failure. Discomfort doesn't mean an unsafe space. It's often a sign that something real is happening. So don't be afraid of discomfort. And you will find actually that people of color, especially Black people, love to talk about race because we often have to think about it. And we feel free and open and heard when we actually get a chance to talk about it. And the fourth pillar is deprivatizing language. We need to deprivatize language. Language should be a shared tool, not a corporate asset. So real inclusivity means words that belong to those who live their meanings, not to those who market them. I repeat, real inclusivity means words that belong to those who live their meanings, not merely those who market them. So this isn't just a nice to have, as you can probably gather. It's essential. And the best workplaces will be the ones that get this right. Those that don't, well, they'll keep throwing diversity brunches and wonder why things are not happening. And on that note, I'll pass over to you, Sally.
Oh, thank you, Gifford. Gosh, I could sit and continue to listen rather than be remembering that I'm also part of this webinar. So thank you so much for that introduction. I want to focus specifically on the sort of communications toolkit that we have within our organisation. And Charlie, if we go on to our first slide, I think that the biggest mistake I see in organisations is that they completely misunderstand the power of communication. And as a result, they kind of misuse it. They believe that communication is there to tell employees. So we tell them the strategy, we tell them their jobs, we tell them about the economics of the world that we're living in and that they should work harder. We tell them to come back to the office. And if they complain, we tell them to be more resilient. And in the eyes and context of D&I, we continue that sort of blunt use of communication, and we sort of tell them that the world isn't fair. And then we tell them that we all have bias, whether we know it or not. Sometimes we might tell them to be better allies to each other. We might tell them that we've got a new policy that's going to eradicate all this unfairness. And of course, and if we're really lucky, we tell them to celebrate Black History Month, and, unfortunately, telling on its own is not moving the dial. We tried it with well-being as well. We told people to look after themselves and to, it was okay not to be okay, and, that, and to be more mindful and things like that. That also did not solve well-being. So unfortunately, all these workshops and emails and external speakers that Gifford's also mentioning, they are not on their own solving anything. In fact, as a species, we are a storytelling species. Storytelling and communication is the bedrock of us as humanity. And I believe everything, like Gifford says, starts with language. So Charlie, if we go on to the next slide, I want to talk about sharpening this blunt tool, because when we use communication as a blunt tool, we misuse it. And when we aren't intentional or careful with our communication, actually what we cause is more tension, exclusion, isolation, frustration, anger, disconnection. At a global level, that might start conflicts and wars. On a personal level, that sometimes creates divorces and family breakdowns. And in an organization, what that really does is it polarizes and creates really negative cultures. One rule for one, another rule for another. It weakens our workplace relationships, and that slows down productivity or innovation. And what it really does is it disconnects us from our employees. But when we understand communication and we really use it well, we galvanize our workforce teams, we create solidarity, we start a movement, we influence, we build trust. When we create a sense of belonging and we create a shared culture like Gifford's talking about, where we can all be part of one culture, we can educate people, we can go on a learning journey together with no blame and have these difficult and uncomfortable conversations. We can unravel stereotypes and myths, and we can emotionally engage in each other's lived experiences. I haven't lived Anne and Gifford's lives, but they can emotionally engage me in those lives, and I can understand them through communication. So Charlie, if we go on to the next slide, what I want to do is I want to now focus on 6 very key roles that communication can have. Now, there are more, but for today and through the lens of D&I, I specifically want to look at these 6 areas. So if I think first of all about raising awareness, and I think we couldn't have a better example than George Floyd, there is an opportunity for communication to surface a particular issue and bring it to the forefront, like headline news, put it on the front page. We saw what Trump's doing with that headline news. But what we can do is we can bring a story and a problem and a fact to the frontline news. But what we have to understand that on its own, that does not move the dial. Okay, so George Floyd did a great job for many organizations, but unfortunately we didn't use all the other tools in the toolkit. So that was raising awareness. We can inform, okay? Informing, which is telling, is moving information from A to B. And on its own, again, it is not the full toolkit. But sometimes when we want to change a policy and change the way we firmly want to do something in an organization, then that is a tool in the communications toolkit. Education, on the other hand, is a more than inform. Yes, it moves information between 1 and 2 or A and B, but what it does is it really encourages a deeper understanding. It encourages reflection and thinking on the behalf of the recipient. So it is more two-way, and it's where we might, for example, start talking about allyship. We might not just inform, be a better ally, but we might to really talk about reflecting on how could I be a better ally? How am I at allyship at the moment? Where are the opportunities where I could be a better ally? So education in that sense is way stronger than informing. Listening. Now, we do have, as many of you may have heard, 2 ears and 1 mouth. Unfortunately, organizations often have 10 mouths and 1 ear. Okay, so listening, whether it's ERGs that Gifford mentioned a minute ago, whether it's employee surveys, whether it's exit interviews, whether it's manager check-ins, all of these things tell us a story, and they're only useful to us when we aggregate that story and really understand deeply what we are hearing. And often what we find with employee surveys is that we're a little quick to look at, 86% of our team think X, Y, Z. Yeah, but what about that percentage that didn't think that? Is that quite magnified in one particular group? Is that are certain communities who are feeling less represented? Don't hold on to that big score, but look deeper at what we are hearing and listen well to what everybody is saying to us. Inspiring. Now, that's another role that communication can play. And in this space, who better than Martin Luther King? But, this is about a leader envisaging and sharing that vision for a better world. And I want to see our leaders in our organizations, whether that's the C-suite or whether you've got senior stakeholders or executive sponsors or whatever, let's look at who do we have in our organizations who can help inspire. And it takes vulnerability, and it takes bravery, and it takes boldness, and they need to have good communication skills. But I think there's a long way we can go when we're intentional with inspiring those stories. And then something that's very important to me right now, which is this last one, and very underutilized, overlooked: reassure. Now, when you've got something difficult going on in the world or in the organization, communication also plays a major part of filling a void and reassuring and stabilizing, helping to reduce that fear and acknowledging something that is going on. And I wouldn't underestimate this. I actually held a bit of a listening group for my DEI forum here so that we could just discuss what is going on in the narratives of the media and feel it and acknowledge those feelings and come out going, okay, I got it off my chest. I didn't bottle it up. Now, these are just 6 roles that I think communication plays, but I think what they illustrate is that when you use one part of communication as a blunt tool and you just keep telling, it does not move the dial. And Charlie, if we move on to my next slide, I'm going to give you some tools in your toolbox, and these are to use communication with this intention and be very intentional about what type of communication you're doing. But these are kind of like my tips right now, specifically in this space. Number 1, I want you to own your narratives in your organizations. It is all too easy to fall prey to what is going on in a very hurting world right now. There are wounds that are opening up, and organizations that are not filling that and going, hang on, this is where we sit in our organization, and get that message across their workforces. They're missing a trick, because don't be thinking that just because that headline was a week ago and it's outside of your organization, that your employees are not feeling it right there in your organization. They are looking to you as communicators to explain and contextualize what they're hearing in the news and on TikTok and in all of these other places. And the second thing I say there is filling the void. I often, with my clients, look for the elephant in the room, I call it. But the elephant in the room is the thing that we won't talk about. And it's easier if we just don't talk about it. And I want to encourage you to fill that void. So if, dare I say, there has been something happen in your organization, maybe you've disbanded an ERG, or you have changed an organizational structure, or policy has been rolled back, or something dreadful is going on there. And maybe you've actually got a really great rationale as to why that has been the case, or maybe something's been delayed. Fill that void. Be brave enough to explain your rationale as to why that's going on. And if that's a tricky conversation to have, then work with people like Anne and Gifford and myself to help to frame that story appropriately. Because honesty there, and this is my next point here, honesty about what is happening is your absolute super strength here. People are adults. I'm pretty sure that everybody that we are presenting to today in all your organizations, you are not employing 5-year-olds. And if you are, you should not be. You are employing adults. So please treat your employees like adults. The next thing I'm going to tell you there is surface your human library. And I mean this because, for example, when you listen to me, I've got a very middle-class voice. I live in Surrey. You can see the colour of my skin. So you don't know that I was actually born in Kenya and brought up, and my parents still speak Swahili. You don't know that my husband is from Pakistan and my family is multiracial and that I'm a Muslim. And you don't see that, but you are sitting on gold in your workforce. You have thousands of stories that cannot be seen. So surface your human library and share those stories, because that's where the gold is. I think Gifford said this next one himself, but creating safe spaces. It cannot be a cheesy word, psychological safety. I know it's become a word that people are kind of banding around like we can just do it. But create those safe spaces where you are genuinely saying, no, we seriously want to listen. And that means this is not career limiting to speak up and say, by the way, this awful thing has actually happened to me here in this organization. So when you ask a question, you need to be ready for the answer. And my last thing there is about flipping the business case. I'm going to be a bit opinionated here, but I do not want to protect the world and the work of diversity and inclusion. I do not want to explain why it's important. What I actually want to do is I want to explain the world and visualize the world when we stop doing this vital work. What happens to our organization when we stop, when we hold back on D&I work or racial equity work? What happens? What happens, and what is the cost of doing that to our business? I want to stop defending it, and I want everybody to be really clear what happens when we stop it. That is what I mean by flipping the business case. So I'm just going to finally, my last point that I'm going to say before I hand over to Anne is that there's a sort of nursery rhyme that we might have all heard, which is sticks and stones won't break my bones, will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And as Gifford has already said, and I'm sure Anne will say the same, and certainly you're hearing from me, in fact, our broken bones can be fixed, but our words can hurt for years and years. And, you know, I'm going to encourage everyone to think for 1 second about something, one thing even, that's been said to them in their lives that could have been 20 years ago. And see if you can remember that very moment, the person that said it, and how it's hurt you. Because I can tell you that there are several sentences that I have got rent-free in my head that people have said to me over my years of career, etc., that have not left, and they've left a scar. And so let's just remember the power of communication. And on that note, Anne, I shall hand over to you.
Thank you, Sally. So here's the thing. A lot of what you're hearing today is focused around the big C, communication. But we need to frame it in the context of our organizations having the right culture, because the communication cannot happen if we don't have the right culture. And culture isn't something that's afar. Culture is actually focused on the people within the organization. So Sally's given you a very clear toolkit. I'm now going to provide you with some really effective communication strategies. Where do you go to ensure that communication is free, it's honest, it's working with the right people, it's effective, so that when things get a bit, we call it sticky, a bit tricky, that you know that within your organization, because ultimately people will go to work in organizations where the communication is clear, where they are heard, where they are understood. So there are 3 areas that I'm going to focus on. If Charlie could move to the first slide for me. The first is around the right discussion. The second is with the right people. And the last area that I'll focus on is about having the right approach. So in terms of the right discussion, we have to set the stage. We have to make sure that the topic, that the focus is really well chosen, ensuring that whatever we are talking about is relevant, it's purposeful, and it's aligned with objectives, because nobody wants to be going into meetings and to be going into discussions that they don't really feel are very relevant to them. So the clarity of purpose is all around being explicit from the start, being explicit why the conversation is happening. Is the goal really to inform? Is it to make a decision? Is it to resolve a problem, or is it to generate ideas? And bearing in mind that everybody in that discussion will have a role to play and they need to be heard. The purpose prevents the meeting from actually drifting and ensuring that everyone is aligned. And when we watch some of the information through social media, we see that we come on to hear one thing, but the moment that the dialogue opens, actually we don't know which platform we're on. We don't know whether it's a subject they said they were going to discuss. So be very clear. Clarity of purpose is the first thing. And again, is it going to be relevant to everybody in the room? Tailor your discussion to meet the needs of your audience. If you're talking about different levels of leadership within your organization, again, it may mean that you need to have different types of meetings for different levels of employees. And avoid giving unnecessary details. What do they really need to know? Sharpen your dialogue and stick to what really matters for that particular group in front of you. What do these people need to know? What needs to be decided? What needs to be acted upon? And how can they be involved as a result of the conversation that you are going to have? This is picking up on something that Sally was saying in terms of being evidence-based, but also being educated about what we talk about. No one is going to win an argument if they have come in without the correct data, without the correct research, without the correct context, because there's bound to be somebody in the room that has done their homework that is actually going to be more relevant in the conversation than you. So we are not asking ourselves to be experts, but make sure that what we are talking about is really evidence-based. Make sure that whatever sources of information we are using, that those are credible. Again, there's so much orally that we're hearing at the moment where people are saying, well, I'm taking it as being the truth because I heard it on the news. I'm taking it as being the truth because I heard it I saw it on a social media post. Make sure that where we are getting our information from comes from a really credible source. And again, avoid making vague assertions. Someone like me will listen very clearly in on a conversation and I'll think, what did they just say that? Because actually that isn't correct. And there's a lot of that going where people will come out with big sentences and you think, well, that really isn't it. And yet nobody has the ability, nobody has the confidence to say, but that was just not right. And we have to ourselves ensure that we bring that confidence into the conversation. And the last thing with regards to having the right conversation is to make sure that it is timely. And what I say to people sometimes is when really difficult moments happen around us within our society, but also globally, when do we decide to come in and have that conversation? When we know that there are people within our organizations that are going to be impacted upon what's in the news and beyond, when is the right time to discuss? So good communication happens at the right time, not just in time. And raising issues proactively rather than reactively. If you know something needs to be done, don't wait till you are in the middle and actually there's no point. Raise it before it becomes an issue so that you are being really proactive. And the last thing before I move on to my second slide there is consider deadlines. What is it? How is it going to build into your strategic work? How is it going to be built into getting feedback from people? So that sort of decision cycle is really key in making sure that your communication is fit for purpose. In terms of my second area, I'm going to ask Charlie to move on again there. Engaging the most relevant stakeholders for productive outcomes. Who's in the room, whether that be physically or virtually like today, that can make or break the type of communication that you have. And again, we always watch who is in the room. Is it going to be key decision makers? Because actually, if there are no key decision makers in the room, it just means that you're going to need to have that conversation once. Then the second time you have it, actually, it doesn't replicate the first time. It doesn't even make sense the second time that you have it. So make sure, involve those who have authority to take action and make final decisions. Otherwise, opt out. Really, opt out, because it's no good people saying, well, I've had a really great discussion, but actually I'm going to have to take it somewhere else because none of us in that room can actually implement and act upon it. So without key decision makers, discussions can stall or they can lose impact. And if unavailable, ensure that the mechanisms are there to escalate what was decided within those particular meetings. In terms of education, again, that we've touched upon, the subject matters. So make sure that there are experts in the room. Bring the people in with the knowledge to add depth. It doesn't always have to be the same people, but they might be able to answer technical questions that you're not able to answer. And their presence also strengthens the credibility of what you are trying to portray, and it avoids people making certain assumptions. There's a group of people that I call influencers and implementators. And we always look for these people when we are talking, don't we, Gifford? So they think beyond hierarchy, and they include those who are going to make things happen. So make things happen, but also influence others. There are people with presence. There are people with confidence. There are people that will go into any room, be it an exec room, a senior room, and they will be able to influence those people in the room because they know their subject matter. They know what the objectives are of that particular type of communication, and they know that they need to act. So involving them creates buy-in, and it reduces resistance at a later stage. And lastly, really, in terms of having the right people, we're talking today about diversity, aren't we? Because diversity, we know, proven through several pieces of research, that diversity improves decision making and creativity. It encourages contributions from perhaps quieter people, quieter voices, and it creates that psychological safety that everybody feels that they can be heard at an appropriate time. Moving on to the next slide, the last thing really that I wanted to focus on was on the types of approaches that you use. So by using effective strategies to communicate the outcomes can actually become more meaningful. So how you could communicate can be as important as what you say, how you say it, what you say. And the first thing, putting my executive coach hat on, is that whole thing, the power of active listening. And you're not listening to jump in and give the answer. You're not jumping in to give a conclusion. You're actually really listening in, and you're listening in without interrupting. Because I go into the whole body language aspect as well, because sometimes those silences tell me more than when somebody continues to talk. So avoid jumping to conclusions, listen to understand, don't just listen to reply. And then use those silences, give people space to think. If you're asking them to open up and share, give them that space to think. So what types of media are we going to use? Well, some of those platforms, and you know which platforms I'm talking about, I just avoid to the hilt. And yet the dialogue will keep going on and on and on. But one of the things that really means a lot to me is not just how we might use social media, but we are looking after the next generation of leaders, aren't we, globally, somewhere along the line. So it's important that we educate ourselves and ensure that young people into our organizations as well are using effective channels to listen to correct messages, particularly around complex and sensitive topics and things like that. Again, some of the mediums might be around whether you would hold in-person meetings, whether you would hold workshops, whether you would hold one-to-one pieces, do one-to-one pieces of coaching, whether you do collaborative tasks. A lot comes out of doing collaborative tasks. Whether you share documents, whether you give documents before the meeting, or and ask people to discuss it during a live meeting. So one is be clear about the trail or the medium that you use, but two, how quickly, what type of information people receive. And the last couple of things really is about having a clear and concise message. Structure your communication, lead with key questions, lead with key points, lead with open questions, and then follow through with supporting detail. Make sure people are heard. Avoid using lots of jargon. That's really not necessary. And end with a clear decision, so people know once they leave that room, is it around allyship, is it around policy, is it around implementing certain things, so that those clear actions of responsibility are going to be key. The last thing, and this, I'll just finish on this, that we don't all have to be shouty. That's probably the word I would use in terms of getting our views across. We have to be constructive. We have to maintain respect. And as far as I can see globally, that respect factor has seemed to, and I put a post in the other day that said some words seem to have just disappeared from our dictionary. Respectful, constructive in our dialogue, especially if we disagree with somebody. We can disagree and be open and be warm and focus on, well, we are disagreeing, but how are we going to move this conversation forward? And the last thing that I would say, which is really key, particularly in the area of diversity and inclusion, is if you're going to open the door, let's keep it open. Because there's a lot of blaming, isn't there, in DEI? Avoid blame language. Avoid saying it's your fault that this is happening, because that doesn't help anybody. People just tend to switch off. Focus on solutions. Focus on sharing the goals that you really, really want, about unity and about progressing together.
Fantastic, Anne. Thank you so much.